Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country. Together we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny, and we're going to achieve the most incredible future.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. You're watching Beyond the Headline, and I'm Sneha Koshy. Donald Trump's massive triumph and mandate has a very direct bearing on not just who will head the United States of America, but further divides a very polarized media landscape. That's right. The former president has been on an expansive, non-traditional media tour during the 2024 race, sitting down with a range of podcasters and live streamers, often those targeting young men that some publications have called are in search of, quote-unquote, the bro vote, or what some other publications have referred to them as the dude podcasters. The world of alternate media has challenged the mainstream media, deepening the allegation of bias against them. In fact, according to one of Trump's most trusted advisors, Jason Miller, who spoke about the campaign approach with the Playbook Deep Dive podcast, while he did credit the entire Trump team on selecting the alternate media podcasters, he gave a shout out to Donald Trump's son, 18-year-old Barron. Hats off to the young man. Every single recommendation he's had has turned out to be an absolute ratings gold that's broken the internet. That's Mr. Miller for you, and gives you a very strong sneak peek into how Donald Trump's campaign was run. From Elon Musk, the owner of X, formerly Twitter, and a billionaire entrepreneur who not only openly endorsed Donald Trump, but pumped an estimated $120 million into Trump campaign and even interviewed Trump on X. He restored the Twitter X accounts of people banned under previous ownership, dismantling the platform's fact-checking and safety features. In fact, Trump's X account, which was suspended, was restored as well. And little surprising, Elon Musk got a big shout out from Donald Trump himself in his very victory speech.
Let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is. Now he's an amazing guy. We were sitting together tonight. You know, he spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia and different parts of Pennsylvania campaigning.
Interestingly, UFC CEO Dana White lauded the influence of prominent online personalities, including Joe Rogan, Aaron Ross, and the Nelk boys, among others, during President-elect Donald Trump's victory speech in Florida. Addressing the cheering, jeering crowd, White referred to Rogan as the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan.
I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelk boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, busting with the boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan.
Donald Trump podcasting his way to power. That may be just about a very simplistic way of putting it, and it can never be so simple in elections, particularly in the United States. But podcasting, alternate media, has played a pivotal role in how Donald Trump shaped opinions and the mandate around him. Let's look at some of the prominent podcasters that he did go and give an interview to. Joe Rogan, The Joe Rogan Experience, predominantly attracting young male audience, a long 3-hour conversation covering diverse topics. Episodes often exceed 14 million listeners. With millions of followers. You have Theo Von podcast, includes personal stories, lighter topics, appeals to fans of comedy, personal storytelling. The episode with Donald Trump sparked viral interest instantly. A very candid side of Trump that was portrayed there. At least 100, in fact, at least 1 or 2 million downloads per episode is what's reported for this podcaster. Then you, of course, have the Nelk Boys, targets younger audience with casual formats, focuses on fun interactions, light-hearted discussions on politics, culture. Again, look at the subscriber base, 1 to 3 millions per episode. And, if you will go through several other names that will come up on your screen, it will give you a sense of the kind of interviews that Donald Trump did. Did Kamala Harris not do them? Well, she also did podcasts. But very, very less in compared to Donald Trump. Just about 2 is what we could find. Largely mainstream media is what Kamala Harris did give her interviews to. And if you look at how this has panned out, it's not just podcasters. You also have the gaming and the live stream social medias. In fact, though Donald Trump did not appear on gaming live stream sites like Twitch and Kick, many who are there endorsed and relayed his streams, garnering millions of viewers, be it on Twitch or Kick. If you're unfamiliar with these, you have these descriptions up on your screen. It'll explain to you in brief what it really is. And it's interesting because it's not just the United States. Countries across the world are seeing all of these increasingly, particularly in political narrative. And it's timely to remind ourselves of the 2022 Gallup survey on faith and bias in traditional media. Look at this. When this survey was done around 2 years ago, 31% expressed confidence in traditional media, traditional mainstream media. 36% reported having no trust at all. And this 36% is, of course, much higher than those who did express any form of trust. And it was a consecutive year of no trust topping the survey. 54% Democrats expressed confidence in traditional media. But when it came to Republicans, it was just 12% Republicans who expressed confidence. And remember, here's the big debate, where largely the allegation from the Republicans or supporters of Republicans have been that the mainstream media has been biased towards the Democrats. Possibly the survey could just about show how the feelings have been towards that. We'll have to see how much of that really is a reality. We'll have a panel on that as well. 26% under age 50 were confident, and 43% people age 65 and over were confident in traditional media. This was the Gallup survey, again, a very reputed survey. So what really does this mean? As triumph for Trump finally unfolds, what does it mean not just for the United States, but for media and the media landscape? Let me open this up to my panelists at this point. I'm being joined by Smita Prakash, who's an editor for ANI, Ray Locker, who's a journalist and author. We'll eventually be also joined by others as well. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. It is a great day to be discussing the media landscape, and both of you have a great experience with that. Allow me to go to Ray Locker first. Ray Locker, how do you look at what's unfolded in the United States? What's your perspective on this? You, of course, have a first-hand experience of how this has unfolded, the kind of smear that has gone on when, say, Donald Trump has been interviewed. It's not the way they have wanted, and the kind of allegations that would go on in the mainstream following that. How do you look at how the mainstream bias is now the cornerstone of an election in the United States? The results possibly throwing questions about that as well.
Well, I don't think the mainstream media are biased. I certainly wasn't when I was working at USA Today, the Associated Press, and other newspapers. I think you have to bring hard questions to people who are in power. And a lot of people were saying, look, the media was biased against Joe Biden. Why are you writing about how old he is all the time? Well, he was old, okay? But is old. The big thing is mainstream media, as practiced by major newspapers, which are shrinking rapidly, or network TV news, people are finding more ways to find information. And that's something that's happened over time. It's very pronounced now because there are so many different outlets. And it's incumbent on any candidate to kind of get his or her hands around that and figure out the best way to do it.
Reloker, but when you look
at
at the alternate media scape, I mean, is it exceptional? Is it exceptional the way the alternate media was used to shape narratives and eventually the mandate that has given Donald Trump the victory? I mean, this has seen precedents in early elections as well, but is it the most pronounced in any manner in this election? And what does this really mean for the US media landscape?
Well, I think it is the most pronounced, and I think it's incumbent on future candidates to find a way to get their hands around it and use it to the best of their abilities. What's happened this year is going to be used as a model, and it'll change in 4 years because it always changes. So I think we're going to see more of that. And I think mainstream media, such as what I used to practice, is going to continue to diminish, sad to say.
Smita Prakash, how do you look at this, Smita Prakash? It's, I mean, making this very light, some people may say he's podcasted his way to power. It isn't as straight as that. But it's been a huge role. It's played a huge role in shaping opinions. How do you really look at this, Smita Prakash?
Look, for us in India, it's not new what he has done. We saw Mr. Modi using social media right from 2014 onwards. He had very little faith, misplaced or whatever, in traditional media. And he's the first one in India to use social media way back in 2014. He continued to do that. And of course, he gave interviews to mainstream media subsequently after that. What Donald Trump has done is whether he went on the podcast or whichever interview that he gave, he has a very different style as compared to Kamala Harris. She went on some channels. She was a little reserved as compared to this very bro style that Donald Trump has. And Elon Musk, when he gave that shout out, I think that man worked incredibly hard to get Donald Trump elected. He has used his platform in a completely partisan way. He has not shied away from it. He said this is a platform. And, I've covered American elections. And the first time that I covered it, I'd read about it, yes. But when I covered it, I was quite amazed initially that how can a newspaper in America, which talks about free press, endorse a candidate? How is that possible? If you're endorsing a candidate, that means you're not unbiased. That means all your journalists who are on the ground know that your editorial team is biased because they are endorsing. They want a particular candidate to win. So these newspapers and the left-lib media in America, which always talks down to us, so-called third world countries, that we don't have free press, that we don't criticize our leaders, that we don't talk truth to power. The fact is that they showed a bias in every election that I have noticed. And, they might say no, but it's quite obvious when you watch their television bulletins. All through the Trump years, it was mocking Trump. All through the Biden years, they were still mocking Trump. So, when Kamala Harris went on these bulletins, interviews, she was talking more about why Trump is not the right candidate rather than saying why people should elect her. So this is where the problem occurred.
Interesting. In fact, you mentioned about Prime Minister Modi. Eventually, you even had Rahul Gandhi go ahead and give many of these interviews, alternate media as it called, social media as it called, whether it be down south or in other states as well. You had all of these media influencers go and interview them. So it is now part of Indian politics as well, but still a very long-drawn comparison to United States. I think we have lost Ray Locker. But Smita, let me know once we have Ray Locker. Smita Prakash, sticking to United States, when we look at the kind of podcasts that Donald Trump did give, the kind of interviews that he did give, what would you say to the counter that's coming in, that they had a very pivotal role in softening his image? There are cases in the court, there are felony charges against him, and amid it all, the softening of the image. And it's interesting because it's an 18-year-old son who seemed to have recommended many of these podcasters. Very interesting interjection that's really paid out.
Well, the thing is that I saw a couple of them, and they're long. He has this very meandering way, which he calls the weave. He has that style of talking. He doesn't get flustered, I've noticed, and he says he's not embarrassed by what he speaks. So they're not very well crafted answers. He just speaks whatever he wants to, and he uses cuss words. And it's like I said, it's a very bro style of talking. And in fact, in one of them, he said, "I'm basically a truthful person." Who says that, right? So he said SOB in one of them. So he has no hassles, and because it's a podcast, there's no censorship, there's no bleeping, which happens. So he spoke all that. Whereas when Kamala went on to, say, the Stephen Colbert's show, she cracked open a bottle of beer. But it seemed very forced. It was like we've seen Hillary Clinton. She had to go on a baking show, where she had to show that she could bake, just to cull that image that she is a hard-nosed pantsuit wearing person. So we've come a long way from that. As far as media is concerned, when you're saying that Rahul Gandhi also had to use the media, he used podcasters, and in the 2024 elections, and then you saw podcasters being used in the J&K elections and Haryana elections recently. Media is not the only reason why people win or lose elections. I mean, in Haryana, they used it very well. Some of the podcasts that came out of the Haryana elections were very, very funny, and they were very interesting. I remember one of them, I can even name it if you want, Samdesh, who went to the Haryana polls, and when he was talking to people, were like, "Oh, no way that Khattar is going to win. No way BJP is going to win." They were very interesting. But what happens is that on the ground, people vote differently. So the silent voters who watch the podcast don't necessarily like the person that they are seeing. Or you already made that bias in your mind. A podcast just reinforces that bias.
That's true. In fact, Smita Prakash, allow me to just introduce our other two panelists as well. I'm being joined by Kushal Mehra, who's an author and podcaster as well as Mumtaz Patel, who's a politician and a youth Gen Next leader, as she likes to call herself. But allow me to just come back for one last question as well, Smita Prakash. You spoke about, and it's interesting that you spoke about Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, the comparisons that you drew. But while the alternate media was used so extensively, it's also interesting to see how America voted. Women, whether it be white or, voters largely, whether it be white or black, they have voted for Trump more. Whether it be women between the age group of 18 to 44 or 45 and above. 45 and above, there's not been much of a change, but 18 to 44, which also includes a bulk of the first-time voters, have voted for Trump. There's also the location-wise, a lot of Latinos that have gone ahead and voted. So it's extremely interesting. How much would you say would be the reach of podcasters? I mean, alternate media, not just podcasters, alternate media really. First-time voters would possibly have a lot to do with live streaming and gaming, and possibly that's where the narratives were being set.
Yes, first time voters, I totally agree with you. They are a big consumer of podcasts. They do watch. In fact, you have Kushal on the show. The first time I went on a podcast was, I think, with Kushal, if I'm not mistaken. And I was just learning as to how to do podcasts, and I learned a lot from Kushal. He's done very well. Lately he's been talking about how the Canadian politics is playing out, how Khalistani, and I watched that a lot to see how he brings out the truth. Whereas if you watch the mainstream media in Canada, uh, it doesn't give you the right picture. So this is what it is now. The choice for, especially for first-time voters, is tremendous, right? We don't get the first-time voters don't want to restrict themselves to just one channel. Probably my generation is someone is the first generation which had that exposure. You know, we when we were young, we had just Doordarshan in India, and then liberalization happened and this boom of channels that came in. Your generation would have this available already on television, and the next generation, the first generation voters, don't even probably watch television. They're watching, or they're getting their information from
That's
all
true.
kinds of places. So
Across the
it's
world.
very interesting, and it's also the message gets diluted over various platforms. So a politician who wants to reach out to different strata of society and different demographic groups has to go on all these platforms and not restrict themselves to one or two.
Right. Smita Prakash, thank you very much for joining us, for your time. It's been an interesting conversation. There's so many more aspects to discuss, but we'll leave that for another day. Thank you very much, Smita Prakash, for joining us.
Thank you.
Mumtaz Patel, let me just come to you at this point. What's happened in the United States is not very distinctly different from what's unfolding in India as well.
What has been unfolding in India for the last couple of decades. In fact, if I talk in terms of the mainstream parties, I think the opposition came in too late in the social media game, but now they've made a inroad and how.
That's true.
And it took like a decade of maligning RG's image, Rahul Gandhi's image. I mean, it was like a well thought out campaign strategy. We had hostile mainstream media. We still do. And the opposition voice had been drowned out completely. And that is when Rahul Gandhi, with the Bharat Joro Yatra, and later on, moved on to alternate messaging platforms, and that is how we see so much of him on podcasts. We see his social media game strong. We see the Congress social media game strong. Today, even when I'm talking over here, probably there'll be not enough people who will be tuned into the channel. But when these clips come out on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, that is when the audience connects. And this is the new age way to go. It helps us directly connect with the audience, anybody. It's not just about politicians.
Kushal Mehra, so yes, opinions of course get shaped. Whether they get changed or not, that's obviously up for debate. There have been studies and surveys for both ways. But Kushal Mehra, reinforcement is a very, very big deal. Because podcasters often would have their followers, ideologically the same or not. It's not necessary all podcasts would have an ideology. There would be those with tech, gaming, and they may not be very pronounced with their ideology, but then there will be an instance where they'll suddenly be interviewing somebody and that just gives it off. You know, you have followers who would not be following politics and then they suddenly are hearing a very political interview unfolding. That's literally what's happened in some of the podcasts that's happened in the United States as well. How do you really look at that, Kushal Mehra?
Well, the first thing is podcasts are not interviews. I think often people make that mistake that they assume podcasts are interviews. Podcasts are conversations where sometimes the host speaks for 5 minutes and the guest speaks for 20 minutes and could be other way around, which is why podcasts have taken off, because it's like a drawing room conversation in a closed room, in a closed area. That's why podcasts have taken off. But I actually am not entirely convinced that it's just the podcast that help politicians these days. Podcasts actually, as far as the news landscape is concerned, they feed off the mainstream media. So The news is always culled from the mainstream media, or sometimes the mainstream media picks it up from what somebody must have tweeted out. So I think they feed off each other both. But there is a giant swath of people now that only listen to podcasts or or just watch YouTube. And which is why, even channels like yours, you have to be on YouTube. So a lot of people may not be consuming you through the television set. They might be consuming you through their cell phone or using a YouTube channel or an app. So it's a little more complicated. I don't think that it is just the podcasting landscape that has done it, but podcasts have changed. Again, we cannot compare India and America because Indian nature and American natures are different. The Americans are very different in compared to Indians. Indians like gladiatorial matches on televisions. Americans don't like it. They get turned off.
No, but Kushal, it's also the fact that podcast is a very, it's still in India very niche. It's a very urban niche. You don't have podcasts being listened to, consumed across India the way it's consumed in United States. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I consume podcasts, but I don't see many people around me consume podcasts. It's still, it's not out there all out like in United States.
Absolutely, you're 100% right. And any YouTuber who says that is lying to you, which is why, it's very fascinating that a lot of times in the last election, a lot of analyses were made that, the BJP got dented because of podcasting. It's actually false because I've looked at the data. The data is available. You just have to pay for it. And every YouTuber's data is available for the record, by the way. So, the Congress did actually,
what do you
or
mean
the
by
India
that?
Alliance did better in rural areas.
What do you
and
mean by
podcasts
that
and
when you say
YouTubers
that
have no influence there.
it is false to say that BJP was dented because of the live streams and podcasts? It's interesting. What do you mean by that?
They were not actually. The reason the BJP was dented is because of other reasons. Because if the podcasters had an effect, the BJP would have been dented majorly in urban areas where the podcasters are heard. But the BJP did very well in the urban areas. They did miserably well, miserably badly in the rural areas where the podcasters are not heard. So it's actually the other way around in India. In America, I agree. In America, podcasts are now the mainstream. The mainstream has changed in America. The establishment media is no longer the mainstream over here in America or in Canada. The entire content landscape has gone into all these platforms, but it's not the same in India. And I often think India remains 7 to 8 years behind America. Now in the next 10 years, with digitization and this penetration going farther more in tier 2, tier 3, and even rural areas, then you will have these giant content creators that will have way more influence. But as of now, I think we need to get real. Podcast is an urban phenomenon in India. They influence urban areas, not rural areas.
So, Mumtaz, here's what Kushal Mehra claims. And listen, it was BJP being dented by alternate media. Podcasts is just a very naive claim. But, that brings us to our next question. And I want both of you to answer. Mumtaz, you could start off with this. Fake news versus real news. The lines are getting even more blurred as alternate media rises up to challenge what's there in the mainstream. So it's fake news and what may be the authentic news is quite a matter of narratives. And in a political electoral game, it just gets even more murkier.
So that's why, I mean, it's not just about podcasts. That when you talk about fake news, I think social media gives us the chance to put our own personal view across. So you negate the fake news by being there yourself, the real you. And that is when you have an unfiltered communication with your base, with the people, and you might be able to put out the right perspective because it's coming straight from the horse's mouth. And that is why I think social media dominance has to be the way to go in the future. I mean, you have to have your social media game strong, and you yourself need to filter out the fake news.
Kushal Mehra, how would you see that?
It's going to be there when you democratize discourse. The democratize leads to second order, third order effects. So there are going to be people, because at the end of the day, social media is incentivized by what? It's the idea of the algorithm is they want you to stay there and want your attention. So what catches your attention is usually shock and awe. So it's sensationalism, and fake news is part of it. So we just have to live with this reality. I'll give you an example. It happens everywhere, right?
It's not just
Sometimes if there
living with
is
this reality, though.
misinformation. Yeah, but look at it, right? The rule of the game is lie big, retract small. So when you lie big, you get a lot of attention. You've made your money through the monetization. Then when people correct you, you just have to write a small retraction. It's done.
So, I mean, if you say something as simple as that, Kushal Mehra, if retracting is such a simple solution to what has happened, look at what's unfolded in the United States. Let's just go back to what Trump claimed. The way he countered those claims, just spinned it around, whether it be the usage of garbage, whether it be the claims that he made against media. All of these things were challenged in the mainstream media, but completely subverted by him in alternate media. He has got the mandate. So does one say that his subversion of the other version of that was not his reality has finally won? Is that then a battle of alternate media really making the winner?
I don't know, because you're assuming that the people who watch podcasts are also the ones who watch CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC. That's not the case. Everybody is living in their echo chamber. Usually in the United States of America, people who are 60 and above watch mainstream media. They are in their own echo chamber, and the ones who watch CNN don't watch Fox. The ones who watch Fox don't watch CNN. The ones who watch podcasts are a completely different world. So, and you have to understand, people who watch podcasts, they don't take them as the gospel truth. A lot of podcasting is about entertainment. 90% of podcasts are run by stand-up comics. People need to remember, Joe Rogan is not a journalist. He's a stand-up comic. 70% of Joe Rogan's content is actually cracking jokes, kind of bashing his guests and his guests bashing him. They're just having banter. Podcasting is not serious work. Podcasting is having fun. So people don't go to a podcast for like, let me decipher the truth. Like, look at the YouTube landscape of India. Bhoot, Pishach, and all those kinds of absurdities are there. What do you think politics is the main content landscape of India? No, they're talking about ghosts and astrology and all sort of weird things on YouTube in India. That's your major source. So people often, the ones who do well are actually even podcasters in India. Study their content. I'm probably an exception to the norm, but most of them are talking about ghosts and aliens in India too. So that's what sells. So let's get real.
Okay.
All of this is highly overrated.
It's interesting, why you say that, Kushal. It's also interesting because, again, coming back to Trump, he actually went and was part of podcasts that's, as you said, not really political. They are way beyond that. They are possibly comics, they are comedians, they are into gaming, they are into tech. And so not necessarily their ideologies are right out there, but then you have suddenly followers listening to a very political podcast coming in. Mumtaz Patel, both of you, in fact, Mumtaz Patel as well as Kushal Mehra, both of you are podcasters as well. So as you see what's unfolded in the elections in the US, what are your big takeaways at this point? What's on your mind? Mumtaz Patel first.
So for me, like I said, social media dominance was the way to go. He strategized his tactics very well. He's always been very innovative. I'm talking about Trump. And he managed to connect to the audience. He managed to influence them. He used Twitter, he used Facebook, he used Instagram. I mean, each of these media platforms, he was tweeting himself. He was setting up narratives. He was giving people something to talk about. He was counter strategizing whatever the fake, as per him, fake media was talking about. So I think all that helped him garner a lot of base, and there was so much chatter that was going on, and he connected directly. I think that is what worked for him in the end.
Kushal Mehra, I mean, look at the views that these alternate media sources, podcasters, whether it be Elon Musk, look at the followers that he enjoys. He of course put it out there. He put himself right out there, and it's possibly going to work out great for him. We'll have to see how that works out. But Joe Rogan, 14.5 million followers. Theo Vaughn, at least 2 million downloads per episode. Nelk Boys, again, 1 to 3 million views per episode. I mean, these are large numbers when you look at electoral politics, Kushal Mehra. But as a podcaster, what are your big thought points at this point?
So first of all, please remember, if Kamala Harris would have gone to all these podcasts, she would not have gotten the same numbers. It's Trump's personality that gets the numbers and drives them too. So please, we have to understand it is also a lot to do with Trump. His hand gestures and his swearing. He just goes off the cuff. That's what makes the podcast. Like, I'm no fan of Trump, but let me tell you, I'm the happiest man that he's the president, because it's going to be so entertaining now for 4 years for me as a content creator, because he's actually the best thing. He's like a content creator's gold mine. So look at the podcast he went to. Andrew Schultz, comedian. Joe Rogan, comedian. Theo Vaughn, comedian. What does a comedian want? He wants Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, like it or not, is an entertainer. So it is the perfect. If you had Kamala Harris going there, her team knew she would bomb, which is why her team did not send her there. You would not get the same thing. So it's not just the platform, it is the person and the platform. That's why Trump won, because of his personality. His advisors knew that if he goes there, he's going to be a hero. And that's what led to the victory. If it was somebody else, the magic would not be there. And I think people underestimate Trump's charisma. I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean I let my biases come in my analysis. The fact is, it's Donald Trump that sells, and podcast is, the proverbial SHIT talking culture. Donald Trump is the epitome of that. That's why it works. So please remember that.
All right. I think we have so many more aspects to discuss, but we'll just let it go at this point. Kushal Mehra as well as Mumtaz Patel, thank you very much for this freewheeling conversation. There are some scathing questions in the mainstream media as well that needs to be answered. And in the India landscape, there's quite the parallels that could be drawn in very different versions depending upon which spectrum does one follow, or rather what followers are you of which podcasts and leaders. But thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. For now, it is Donald Trump triumphing. Time for a very short break.